So we did want to quickly give an update on the vaccination. Here in Stanford, our staff at the elementary level were given an opportunity to be vaccinated over the weekend. We had about 719 of our elementary staff sign up for that. We do know that some staff members did have some adverse effects to the vaccination, which was typical. We talked to the head epidemiologist at the Stanford Hospital, and nothing out of the ordinary. However, because Johnson & Johnson, which is a vaccination that they received, is so new to this area, we needed to make some adjustments for our elementary staff. We do not know what vaccination we're getting for our secondary staff members and all others that are eligible. For next week, we will have that information. That information is given to local health departments on Tuesday, so that's tomorrow. So we will have that information out to families just as soon as possible to let you know if we're going to make any changes to our date for reopening for next week for our hybrid learning students 5 days a week. I did want to just take a few minutes and talk about some of the reasons why now would be a good time for us to return to school 5 days a week for our hybrid students, thus increasing the density of our students in our classrooms. And talking to Dr. Yoon, our medical advisor for the city, some of the things that we talked about in terms of why we would make this decision is really that declining trends that we've seen over the last 6 weeks, really this last 6 to 8 weeks. And that's with positivity rates, hospitalizations, and deaths from COVID-19. And so looking at those trends, there was some true belief by our health professionals that this was a good time for us to re-enter school. The other thing that we looked at is information that we've learned from our Department of Health. The Department of Health on a regular basis is providing us, actually weekly, providing us with information about what's going on across the different school districts that have been in 100% or that have been in the hybrid model. And what they've learned over this time period, that there has been very little transmission in our schools across the state. And so re-entering at this time as our data is trending down, that it makes sense that this is a time that Stanford would look at returning to school. We also have an increase in the vaccinations for not just Stanford Public Schools employees, but also for the for our community as a whole. And so that was another reason that we looked at it at this time. And the final reason that Dr. Yoon, along with Dr. Calder, felt like it was a good time to start transitioning back into school for our hybrid learners is because we have determined that a lot of our mitigating factors, strategies that we've used over in the hybrid model over the last few months as we entered school and went into areas of times that we were spiking, we're wearing our masks, hand sanitizing on a regular basis. Those we have quickly found that, and we wouldn't have known this at the beginning of the year, that a middle school student could come to school, wear their mask all day and not really have any impact from it. And so we saw that K-12, really pre-K-12, our pre-K students were even wearing their masks really well. So at this time, because we had practiced all of our mitigating strategies for so long, we felt like this was the time to return to school. So I just wanted to kind of give you an update on kind of our thinking as we made this decision to move forward with reintroducing students 5 days a week, our hybrid students at this time. Which brings us to our next question, probably one of our most asked questions is, what about the DTLA kids? Will they be able to return to school? And at this time, we're asking if everyone could hold off just for a few, about a week, as we reintroduce our hybrid students into school. We want to make sure that we're able to do that in a safe manner. And then your building principals will be in contact with you to give you some details as to how we are going to start the process of reintroducing our distance teaching and learning academy students, if they would like to, into school. It also gives us an opportunity to think about how we are going to support our students that are currently in a hybrid model and do not feel comfortable coming back 5 days a week when we have increased density of our students coming back to school. So please know that you should, if you are in this situation, you're a hybrid student and you're not comfortable returning to school at this time, to reach out to your building principal, and they will walk you through the process they're using at their building to come up with a plan for what you do in the short term before we would determine whether or not it just makes sense to transition you to distance teaching and learning. As I think everyone has heard, lunch was the most complicated part of us re-entering school. So our principals, in conjunction with our custodians, have been working really hard to make sure that we are have areas that students will be able to sit 3 to 6 feet apart. If students are anywhere between 3 and 6 feet and not over 6 feet or over, we are going to place a barrier in front of them for lunch, so that when they take off their mask, they'll be able to eat their lunch and then put back on their mask, but sit behind a barrier. I was able to visit Dolan this weekend, and Charmaine and Scotty have been working really hard to organize their gym and their cafeteria so that they are able to fit the students into those areas. I know that the similar work has been done at all of our middle schools. We are waiting for some additional furniture that will arrive later this week so that we can finish outfitting all of our school buildings. We are asking families, if you can, with the buses, if you're able to continue to drive your child to school or start to drive your child to school, so that we can save really the spaces on the buses for families who are unable to bring their child to school. So if that is at all a possibility for your family, please, we would appreciate anything you can do to help us reduce the number of students that are on the bus at this time. We are, however, working with our transportation department to add buses into our fleet so that we're able to reduce some of the larger routes. Our contact tracing will not change very much. The process will still be the same. If you are within 6 feet, less than 6 feet of someone for more than 15 minutes over a 24-hour period, that you will be considered a contact. We now know that we will have more contacts because we have students sitting 3 feet apart versus 6 feet apart, but we are using a model for having a seating chart both in the classrooms and at lunch, so that students are able to, so that we are able to identify any known contacts. In conjunction, the health department will work with our building principals to continue to do that work. And I do want to give a huge thank you to Mayor Martin, who has really worked hard to make sure that we have opportunities for, if you're not feeling well, to be COVID tested across the city of Stanford. There are many locations. That information can be found on our website as well as the city's website. We are really excited at the fact that our schools with community-based health centers will be able to test at their building, but we are reserving that testing really for our families that for our students and our staff that are are already at school when they start feeling bad. We do not want you to go to school if you're not feeling well. You should use one of our community areas that you can be tested rather than to go into a school building. There are some little adjustments, so please make sure you're called before going to any of our community health centers to be tested. So those are just some of the questions that have come up over the last week and a half. It is your turn now to share some of your ideas and thoughts about us returning to school. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Fernandez at this time, who's going to give an update on how this process is going to work. Dr. Fernandez.
Thanks, Dr. Lucero. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's listening session. Before I explain the logistics of the question and answer and input session, I just want to introduce our other panelists besides Dr. Lucero and myself. I am, again, the Associate Superintendent for Intervention and Student Support. We also have our 5 middle school principals with us, Mr. Scott Clayton from Schofield Magnet Middle School, Mr. Brendan Fox from Turner River Middle School, Ms. Charmaine Davis from Dolan Middle School, Mr. David Tate from Clunan Middle School, and Mr. Matt Laskowski from Rippewam Middle School. Thank you all for joining us this evening. So we have a couple ways for you to ask questions or provide input. If you do have a question, we ask that you put the question in the question and answer feature. You simply click on the Q&A button. There'll be a little dialog box. You can type your question and you hit return. I will do my best to field your questions. Please do put questions in the question and answer. Do not put statements. I'm looking for questions to ask. There's going to be a little bit of balance of doing this along with the chat, not the chat, what am I missing here? In addition to the question and answer, we will be doing a raise your hand feature. So each person that would like to speak, just indicate so by hitting the raise your hand function, and we'll give you about 2 minutes to speak. We'll also be doing this session in Spanish, and the session will be recorded in case someone else would like to view the session. So we'll start with, there's a few questions in the question and answer, Dr. Lucero. I'll just start with the first one. How can hybrid students opt out of a full return and switch to distance teaching and learning?
So we are asking you if you are interested in, or you don't feel comfortable at this time returning and you're currently a hybrid student, to contact your building principal, and they will give you guidance on how we will engage your student until we do an official swap of students who are in distance teaching and learning and students who are currently in the hybrid model. So reach out to your building principal. We are going to, each of them are going to send out another communication, and this information will be included in that communication.
Thank you. There's another question about DTLA. If students choose to remain in DTLA until the end of the year, will that be an option for them?
Yes, at this point, it seems like we should be able to, and actually we are required to keep distance teaching and learning through the end of this academic year. So that will be an option for any student and family who chooses to remain in DTLA.
Thank you. There's a question about the social distancing of 3 feet apart. There's a question of other schools used this 3-foot separation before, and has it been successful? And how does it really work?
Yeah, so our neighbors in Greenwich have been using it actually since the beginning of the school year. In talking to Dr. Calder and Dr. Yoon, they believe that with the rates as they are right now, that they are comfortable reducing the social distancing to 3 feet. Now, in some of our schools, we do have areas that it is more like 4 feet 5 feet. So it really depends on the classroom. As you know, we have some older and some newer buildings, and depending on the particular classroom, but we are spreading out as much as possible. I know principals are working really hard with their custodians to make sure that whatever room we have available, we're spreading out. I do want to kind of talk through, especially at the middle school level, we have really removed almost everything out of a classroom other than a teacher work area and the student desk. So when we think about our regular classrooms, you might have had some computers in your classroom, you might have had a few bookshelves in your classroom. All of those things are gone, and we're really trying to spread students out. So we're finding, although 3 feet is our gold star, we don't want to go any less than 3 feet. We are finding that in many of our locations, we're at 4 feet, sometimes 5 feet. I don't know if any principals want to kind of talk to that at all. If not, we can move on.
I just want to add a little more clarification, Dr. Lucero. There's a parent who asked, what data do we have that 3 feet is an acceptable distance? This parent believes that CDC guidelines still require 6 feet.
It does not require 6 feet. It says to the greatest extent possible. Many of school districts from around the state are moving to less than 6 feet. And we have worked really closely with our health department. What is really important is that all of our students are wearing masks on a regular basis, but this is the guidance that we've been given from our health professionals in the city who have been giving us our guidance this entire school year.
We have a couple of questions around opening and closing. One is, are we still planning to open on March 15th?
Yes. So as you can see, we pushed back 1 day for our elementary students. And then after this weekend, when teachers were not feeling well after the vaccination on Saturday and Sunday, we made the decision yesterday to extend that 1 more day. We now will be able to know tomorrow what vaccination we're getting, and we will work with Dr. Perry, who's the head epidemiologist at the Stanford Hospital, and Dr. Calder to make a decision about whether or not we will begin our session, our opening for 5 days on Tuesday or on Wednesday. So all families should have that information by close of day tomorrow, if not Wednesday morning at the latest.
And then related to possible closing, a parent asked if there's a spike in cases at some point. They said specifically after spring break, but if there were a spike, would we go back to remote learning or to hybrid or to another model?
Yes, so we meet on a regular basis, several times a week with our health professionals. We're looking at our data on a regular basis, and if anything changes, we will revert back to the hybrid model if it is appropriate, but if not, back to distance teaching and learning. I should say remote learning.
There's a couple questions around online instruction. If a student were to have to quarantine or stay home sick, will there be a way for them to still participate in instruction?
I think Scott did a really good job of answering this. Scott, do you want to answer that again from what you talked about earlier in the other session?
Sure, no problem. I'm happy to. My teachers have moved to more of a live streaming model. Over the past several weeks, we are planning to, and for the most part, it's in-person learning with a smattering of students that remain on distance learning. And if students are quarantined, it should be a seamless transition, meaning that they don't have to go to a different section or a different time of day. So for Schofield, if your child has, let's just say, for example, social studies at 8:30 with, Mrs. Lamb, they will still have that same teacher, that same time, should they need to quarantine, through no fault of their own. So that's not a challenge that we anticipate. It should be pretty seamless to go right to their same time, follow their same schedule, like they would if they were in the regular school day. So I hope that answers it.
Thank you.
Can I just chime in on that? Because I want to make sure that there's some flexibility there, because it may look a little differently depending on how each school has that set up. So I know Mr. Clayton has been able to align his DTLA to the same times, I believe, when we met around his hybrid classes. In our case, it is likely that a student who was in hybrid will, it's likely, all of this is remaining fluid because we don't know what kind of numbers we might be dealing with, but it is likely that that student would keep their teachers, but need to shift to potentially a different time when the distance learning class is being taught. So it could depend on numbers, and I don't want to promise everyone that their schedules will be exactly the same, but what we are working to do is to try to keep students with their same teachers, though it might be a different sequence of classes because their status may be shifting. So I want to leave that door open, having not known what our numbers may be looking like.
And Ms. Davis, that new schedule would be communicated to families so that it, once they have to quarantine, that information would be given at that time so that no one is questioning when to get on and when not to join their class during that time. Mr. Tate, did you want to share?
Yes, I also just wanted to add that because of the way that our schedule is set up, we would be offering students either the possibility of live streaming into their existing hybrid section or asynchronous learning with recorded lessons so that they could look at them at their own time, just as we would if a student was feeling ill.
Right.
And again, we will handle those on a case-by-case basis. We'll make sure that there is communication between the teacher and the family so they know what the expectations are.
So as you can see, some of these are adjusted just a little by building, same concept. However, because of the scheduling at each building being just a little different, so it's going to be really important that you are having regular conversations if this happens to you with your classroom teacher or your building principal so they can explain exactly when you should be live joining the class through remote learning.
Dr. Lucero, can I just share our plan for it? So similar to Mr. Clayton and Schofield, our goal is to live stream students in who are on quarantine. So ultimately, if you have ELA at 8 o'clock with Ms. Crouch, you would still have ELA at 8 o'clock with Ms. Crouch. You wouldn't be sitting obviously in the classroom with your classmates, but you'd be able to join them remotely. So that is our goal. Our process is if we have to direct you to quarantine, I would be in touch with you or your grade level administrator, and then a school counselor would follow up with you with an at-home learning plan, and that basically is a visual schedule of what time your classes will be held and the links to access them. And so our goal is to have that mirror exactly their in-person schedule.
Can I just add one piece, Dr. Lucero, if I may?
Sure.
Similar to what I had said earlier, where we run into trouble, and maybe I speak for some of my colleagues here too, is if we get situations where families choose to travel outside of school vacation times, or if they want to go on extended breaks, or there's some circumstance, there's where we don't have the flexibility to just transfer kids into distance teaching and learning, because it is all about numbers. Our class sizes really can't go over 30. So if someone takes an extended vacation out of the country, what have you, we're not able to just move kids to distance learning. The distance learning sections are obviously for folks who have chosen the remote model for whatever the circumstances might be. and to have live streaming for children who have to quarantine through directed quarantine for Stanford Public Schools. So the option, and we'll try to work with families. Obviously, we don't want kids to be denied education, but extended vacations, 3-4 weeks or whatever, we may not be able to just drop kids into distance learning sections. I don't know if anyone else has that challenge, but that's not something that we can sustain over a long period of time. Teachers are juggling quite a bit, and that's just something else that we might not be able to manage.
So if I may just jump in real quick, for Turner River, most likely, as in Dolan's case, you would have live streaming with the hybrid model with the same classes. However, like with everybody else, we're going to look at each individual case and see what are the best supports for that student, that family, and make adjustments as necessary. If it means sliding some schedules around, we'll do the best we can to support our students and families.
Okay, we have a few questions around schedules and scheduling. This might be more appropriate for the principals, but there are a couple parents that asked about, will we be returning to the ABCD rotation schedule? I don't know if any principal, that might be specific just to some of our schools, but if a principal wants to speak to that.
I can speak for Turner River. Turner River and Clunan share a couple of staff members, so we've created our schedule to work in sharing with us those staff members this year. So we're going to remain in a B day schedule for this quarter and a D day schedule for fourth quarter. And I think that might be unique to Clunan and TOR.
Right, and basically that's just going to mean a shift in the time when classes meet, but it's going to be consistent for the full quarter. So when we start the fourth quarter, we will start the D-Day schedule. And in advance of that, we will be reminding everyone of what that schedule looks like.
That's the same for Dolan. Each quarter this year, we have moved through the traditional rotation A, B, C, D, starting with A for first quarter. We are now in a C day, every day session. We will move to a D day for fourth quarter, just like Clunan and Turner River. We have notified our families and our students about that shift at the beginning of each quarter. And as Mr. Tate stated, all classes will still be had, just the sequence shifts a bit. Everything moves down one period. The students have this down pat pretty well, I have to say. Usually they're keeping us adults on top of that. But the good news is the same schedule will happen for the full 10 weeks as we've done each quarter versus a daily rotation as we've done in the past. I think that's what the question is speaking to.
And at RIP, we don't have a rotation. We have a 7-period schedule. We'll keep that intact. The only students who would have a schedule change at this point would be any student who is currently sitting in art or music. Those are our only quarter classes. And so when quarter 3 ends, if you're sitting in art, you would then transition to music and vice versa. So that would be the only change for RIP.
There's a scheduling question regarding DTLA, Distance Teaching and Learning Academy. Are the DTLA students going to go online 5 days a week, at the start of the return to full in-person learning?
That will be the case at Clunan.
Same at RIP.
Same
Same.
at TOR.
I believe all the middle schools are going to be doing that. Dr. Lucero, there's a question about ventilation and have we put in place the proper ventilation system upgrades in our schools?
Yeah, so that was done at the beginning of the year. The state worked with school districts across the state to make sure you have a commissioning agent that came in and assessed your system and make any repairs that are required. That was done at the beginning of the year. There were some issues at a couple of our buildings that were adjusted. We had to go to the board and have some repairs approved. We did that in October. And so we are all to the level that we can be for the year that the system was built. So it was work that we had already been working on in some of our buildings. And so we are at the level that is required by the state.
Okay. There's a few questions, some procedural questions. How will we address hallways transitions? Parent feels that the hallways are crowded. How will we address that? Is there any particular approach, that a staggered approach or anything that the schools are using?
I'm happy to answer that one, at least from my standpoint in Schofield. Since we have a block schedule, the teams do not, and the grade levels do not transition at the same time. With 8 different teams, 2, 4, 6, 8 different teams in the building, they each have their unique transition times. There are only 4 times in the day where the whole building moves all at once. And with some protocols that I'm putting in place with regard to car riders being dismissed early as in 2:30. There's our common advisory end time at 8:30. That's a common transition time. Not even our lunchtime is common. So the whole building doesn't move all at the same time. So that the teams have worked out where the transitions happen grade level team based only.
At Tuna River, we're going to maintain the same number of the students in the hallway as we have now by having them transition by team. Right now we do grade level transitions, which seem to work very well. We'll just split that and transition by team between periods.
At Clunan, we will be monitoring the travel between classes. We are considering possibly staggering classes. However, I would say that because of the fact we've arranged the building so that grade levels are contained in single hallways, there's not going to be a lot of moving up and down or students in other grade levels crossing each other. So the movement will be rather contained.
For us at Dolan, we actually were expecting to have to stagger our movement from September, and we were pleasantly surprised that that didn't have to go into effect. So we do have a staggered schedule ready to roll. Another thing we activated this year that we did keep were directional stairwells. So our stairwells are either all up or all down. And throughout the building, you can only either go up a stairwell or down a stairwell, similar to some of the grocery stores we all have become familiar with. So that has really helped with some of the hoping to not spread germs and the touching and all of that. But we are prepared to activate the staggered passing, which would keep it based on grade level, just a couple of minutes apart. A lot of this, as Dr. Lucero has said repeatedly, and I have to echo, is we're going to have to see how things go. We were very prepared to install all of these precautions when school started in September and found that some things just weren't needed. But we are prepared to initiate them at this time, considering we'll be doubling in large part our size.
At RIP, we are not planning on instituting a staggered transition at this time. We've discussed this thoroughly based on our layout of the school, similar to Clunan and Mr. Tate. Students have grade level hallways, and so 5 of their 7 periods would be within that one hallway. Our passing time is only 3 minutes long, and all of our staff members are in the hallway working with students to move them along quickly. So at this time, we're going to be monitoring passing time for those 3 minutes and moving them directly into their classes. And in most cases, that would only be just a couple of doors down. We do have natural staggers when we dismiss students at the end of the day and when students come into the building. And our lunch waves are also set up to have grade levels on a stagger. So we also we're fortunate our building was built to be a high school. So just the physical width of our hallways is slightly wider than maybe a traditional junior high school. So we have that going for us as well.
Dr. Lucero, we have a few questions around families possibly traveling during the April vacation. And one of the questions is, will students that do travel for April break be asked to quarantine at home when they return. And there's another question asking about some of the travel restrictions that have been lifted and the impact on the schools.
Yeah, the travel restrictions are changing. I believe it's the 19th that they are scheduled to change. And so we are, every week, the Department of Health updates us on what our next steps should be related to travel. And so as soon as that information is out and available to us and they help us digest it, I will be including it in my weekly memo. So stay tuned for information about travel. But what I'm hoping, regardless of what the travel restrictions are, is if you need to travel, that you, when you return, have your family tested so that when they return to school, that we're sure that they have a negative test. That might be the rule at the time, but we hear that it's being lifted and that might not be the case anymore. But if it is, it's just good practice for us. So stay tuned. We'll get you more information about that. And so that everyone sees that information, we'll make sure that that's something that we highlight in the building's weekly message too. So you'll see it at the district level and you'll see it at the building.
There's a question asking about the arts. Will we be returning choir, band, theater at any point?
I had a conversation with Dr. Calder yesterday. She is looking at all of those areas. We know singing is the most complicated thing for us to return to, but other areas she's doing some really hard thinking of what will be appropriate and not appropriate. So stay tuned for that. We should be giving you some information quite soon. One of the biggest questions is play equipment when younger students go out to recess. And so we're looking at all different types of options in terms of both the elementary and middle school and being able to return to some of those activities that we know our students enjoy.
There were a couple of questions around the average class size at the middle school as we return. I know that might be different at the middle schools. I know I looked at the data closely with our other associates, and it really ranges. I think that the middle 20s is probably the average if you were to answer that, but I think there's other important variables that come into play, like the size of the classroom. We have schools with many larger classrooms or smaller classrooms, but there is a range. I don't know if the principals want to add to that. I know we are able to socially distance at 3 feet in all of our classrooms, so that is something that is important. But I don't know if the principals or Dr. Lucero, you want to add anything to that?
Dr. Fernandez, I'll step in on that. So we are starting with 25 desks per classroom. For those sections which are larger, we do have some that are up to 30. We actually are switching rooms so that we can put those classes into larger rooms and therefore be able to spread them out more.
We at RIP have identified there's 7 sections that for 20 students and the highest number 27. And so right now, most of our desks are 5 feet apart, side to side, and 4 feet apart, front to back. So far, the smallest distance or shortest distance is 4 feet by 4.5 feet. So, and that is with 27 desks in it. So far we've been able to spread things out greater than 3 feet. We haven't come across a room that we need to be at 3 feet or less. Everything is wider than that.
At Turner River, the same thing as Clunin, the rooms or the larger class sections, we have available alternate learning spaces, which are larger classrooms that can accommodate the classes of up to 30 easily.
I'll answer. Schofield, our team classes are like low to mid 20s. Our larger sections are our what we call our exploratory classes, our PE, our tech classes. Those are on the upper 20s. We will gain additional access to our gym with moving most of the furniture out. So that's helpful with the larger class sections. For our computer tech class sections, we do have 2 available labs So in the larger lab, if we have one particular section that's probably 29 or 30 students, the teacher will move to her alternate computer lab so we can spread students out a little bit more.
For Dolan, we currently have, I believe, 20 sections above 25 or greater. As Dr. Lucero said, and she was over visiting with us this weekend, we have been pleasantly surprised at the way we've been able to meet the needs space-wise, even for our largest rooms. She's walked through with some of our rooms that are even at 30, and there still is more than 3 feet distance at this time. That may not be the case for every single classroom. However, our larger classrooms seem to be able to accommodate that appropriately. We are taking very careful notice of the distance between seats and making sure that we're at least 3 feet apart, and where we can't be, or if we can't be, we'll be making alternate arrangements as my colleagues have shared. But again, we've been pleasantly surprised with the ability to meet the gold standard, as Dr. Lucero said, of 3 feet apart and beyond. We've gotten, in most cases, more space than that.
There's a couple of questions around supporting students' social emotional learning as they return to school in full in person. I'll speak to that a little bit. And this is providing support to both students that might be more at risk of struggling social emotionally, as well as to all students. There were sort of 2 questions in that regard. We've been doing a lot of work with our administrators over the course of this year. We have just recently had a very good session for all administrators and some teacher leaders around supporting students with trauma and supporting students in a pandemic. But we provided guidance to the schools. The principals know to provide additional support, really opportunities for students to reconnect, to build community, to foster strong relationships, to have activities that they can do with students that would support all these various needs, what we call universal supports. And the schools, don't forget, have systems in place that they've built over time. PBIS is something that you might have heard as a parent. Responsive classroom, something at the elementary level. Yellow Ruler, these are all our systems. Middle schools tend to operate with PBIS. So they have a system in place. We also know that some students get more support from some of our support staff, our social workers, psychologists, our guidance counselors. And we know it's important that those staff are particularly available as students return next week and the first few weeks. So we really want to make sure staff make themselves more available during the reopening of school for students, but they know students that do need more support. And if there is a need, our teachers are very adaptive and very sensitive to ensuring that students get the proper support that they need during this time. I don't know if any of the principals or Dr. Lucero want to add to that. Scott?
I'm happy to speak. Just so folks know, I instructed all of my teachers, and we spent time at our last 2 faculty meetings planning first day of school type activities. So it is my expectation that Schofield teachers will not be diving into the curriculum like nothing has happened over the last year on the day that we all walk back into school. We actually have a Spirit Week plan. Information will be going out about that. We have some extended advisory activities planned. I hope to have balloons up, welcome back banners, to treat this as a day of, hey, we're excited to see you, but we're not going to start solving for X and get into the curriculum the first day of school. As much as we think it might be normal, this is an abnormal set of circumstances. So every teacher and team has some type of social emotional activity planned, not only just for the first day we actually are in the building, but for the first few days thereafter as well.
And Dr. Fernandez, at RIP, we've done a couple things throughout the year. So we've identified small groups of students who might have some higher social emotional needs. And so we have every Friday a group that we call our support team, and they meet and we provide training in a collaborative way where we talk about challenging cases, but we also provide mindfulness training 1 time a week. We wrote a grant that was funded. And so we're going to be training our support team, which is made up of school counselors, our social worker, school psychologists, family advocate, and we have 3 teacher leaders, 1 from each grade, who will be getting trained. And essentially this training is identifying emotions and utilizing physical activity to bring awareness and also relief to some emotions like sadness or anxiety or even anger, and then also coupling that with mindfulness. So you're kind of getting this movement and mindful opportunity. So those are some things that we're working on with a small group of people, but we're going to be expanding on that with our teacher leaders as well.
If I may, I'd like to add that at Clunan, the majority of our teachers have actually worked in SEL goals as a part of their student learning objectives through the year. So not only are we going to be doing some special activities as students return, but it's actually been worked into the lesson plans for teachers throughout the year, continuing to make sure that we're addressing the social emotional needs of students.
At like Clunan, the teachers all design social emotional learning goals, but we're also having our student support staff, they've created a 3-themed approach into connecting with students as they return to school. Themes around perseverance, mindfulness, self-care, and connectedness. And they're going to be pushing into the classrooms over the course of the next few weeks, reconnecting with students, re-engaging with students, and most importantly, letting our students know that they are there to help support them through this transition.
Thank you all. Dr. Lucero, I have a couple parents that would like a few minutes to speak, so I was going to give them that opportunity.
That's great. And while you're moving them over, I do want to, I think someone put a question in the chat rather than the question answer box. So I do want to talk about our 7-day average over 100,000. I think there is some confusion because the state started with 15 per 100,000. And then if you look in Fairfield County, it's at 25 per 100,000. And the new CDC recommendations comes out at 50. Stanford is now at, we're in the low 30s. We started at 80 at the beginning of January, and we've come down to the low 30s. The best place for you to get this information, it's posted on it's updated on the state website, the Department of Health website every week. However, Mayor Martin hosts at 6 o'clock every Tuesday. He hosts a meeting where he is sharing data at the beginning of each of those meetings where these numbers are given out. So if you ever have questions about that, those Tuesday meetings are recorded and they are posted on the city's website if you want more information about where we fall, our 7-day average is. Michael, were you ever to bring over the? Mike, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes.
Mike Field. Oh, great.
Sorry, Mike Field, yes. Are you there?
Yeah. So that helped me a lot understand the numbers, Dr. Lucero. So thank you. And I do feel better. I guess the question was, you said go to the city website, because I went to the CDC website today.
Right.
And your latest update said Fairfield County is at 151 cases per 100K. And I was just wondering.
You have to do the per day. And we have the per day number on the school, our website. The city's website is the easiest place for you to get that information. And if you put your email address in the chat, I'll just push you right towards Mayor Martin's information.
Great. And then last question would be, does that mean that if we get, God forbid, we hit the 50 cases per 100K, then do we go back to hybrid?
The question is maybe, because when we first started this, the state said to us that if you got over 25 per 100,000, you should go to distance teaching and learning. But we've learned a lot since fall. So we continue to work with our local health departments, and they give us guidance on whether or not they think we need to transition educational models.
Great. Thank you for that.
Okay. Yeah, and if you stick your email address in there, I'd be happy to.
I just sent it to you in that Q&A box.
Thank you. I'll get it out to you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike. We have another parent, Tracy Shannonhouse. Tracy? Tracy, can you hear me? All right, we'll give Tracy a minute. I'll go back to a couple questions. I know we don't have much time. We have about 5 minutes left. There was a question about sports and after school activities, Dr. Lucero. I don't know if you want to speak to that. Will those be returning?
So right now we have returned to our high school sports. We will continue to, as we are looking at recess for our elementary students, we will look at any sort of intramurals that our middle school staff might want to re-implement following Dr. Calder's guidance from the health department. So we are trying to get us all back in school safely, and then we'll make some decisions about whether or not we're going to add back any of our activities. It's very important to us, if we can add them back, that we do. So stay tuned for that, because it's something that Dr. Calder and I talked about yesterday.
We're just looking for some other questions. There was a question about buses. Let me see if I can find it. Hold on, there's so many in here.
Dr. Fernandez, would you like me to read it?
Yeah, I can't find it. There's so many questions in here.
I believe this is the question you're referring to. Early this school year, there was a shortage of bus drivers, which required buses to be combined. What is the school bus driver situation, and is there anything changing with the bus schedule?
Dr. Fernandez, do you want to?
Sure, yeah. So we have been doing more hiring, which is a good thing. So we have been increasing the pool of drivers in Stanford. We're going to continue to implement the health and safety protocols on the bus that we have been doing, and really reinforcing those, which is using masks. We have our cleaning protocols in place in between routes, as well as at the end of the day, the deep cleaning that they do. We're going to make sure that students, as much as possible, sit in assigned seats. That's in particular at the elementary level. It gets a little harder at the secondary level. And then reinforcing, again, some of the other loading and unloading, and really reinforcing the mask protocols. We also are encouraging families to drive if you can. I have been working with the Director of Transportation, who has been looking all year and continues to look at our heavier ridership buses. We're looking to pull some buses from some other areas and other schools where there's really light loads to try to taper down those numbers. So those are some of the things we're doing to address transportation in Stanford. Dr. Sarah, I know you spent a lot of time. Maybe this is a good way to close at the beginning, explaining why we're doing this now. There's a perception that we're rushing. I think some people might have got on late and not understanding the timing of this and everything else. I don't know if you want to maybe just speak to that a little bit again to close out. And then, as you know, we have our next session starting in about 2 minutes.
So Thank you. I do think that's a great way to close, because I do have to commend our core committee and our subcommittees that work all summer long. One of the requirements from the State Department of Education is that we are prepared to re-enter 100% hybrid model and distance learning model, that we have a plan that is in place. And so when we got, it started to look like it may, that we would be able to increase the density of number of students in our school. Most of our plans were already developed. You heard some of our building principals, Ms. Davis, talk about the fact that the hallways, we assumed that they were going to be very crowded when we returned to school in a hybrid model. And so they already have a schedule ready for that. We have tried to vet every scenario as we were preparing for this. And so when we started having conversations with principals and starting having conversations with associate superintendents about what is it that we really need to put in place, our biggest areas were lunch and adding desks back into classrooms and making sure that we could space them well. So please know that we would never do anything to not focus on health and safety, because that's what we focused on since we went back to school in the fall, and we will continue to do that. So although it may seem that it went quickly for some, it didn't go quick enough for others, I will be honest. And what we did is go in the pace that we felt was appropriate. And I am very thankful to our building principals and our custodians who have done a lot of this work, our staff that has jumped in now to help really think about all the ways that we can safely reintroduce our kids to school. But we know that if we have to take a pause, we will take a pause. But right now, we believe that we will be ready to open early next week. And we will have a specific date for you tomorrow or early on Wednesday. So I hope that helps people understand that we are not rushing. We're just doing it in an appropriate time, because we know that children learn best inside of their classrooms. And when we got the green light from the health department and our health professionals that it was appropriate to do that, we wanted to move at a pace that we thought was appropriate, however, that would get the students there in a timely manner. So I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. A sincere thank you to Michael Fernandez that did an excellent job moderating for us tonight. Our building principals, you all gold star. I really appreciate all that you've done over the last couple of weeks, and will continue to do as we do our final preparations for students to return next week. And thank you so much to our staff and our teachers who have just worked really hard this year to make this work in education work in the middle of a pandemic. And last, and probably really important, that we thank our students and our families. You all have been amazing. This has not been easy for any of us. We're literally marching to the day that a year ago we left school, and we weren't really sure when we were going to return. And now we're looking at reintroducing our hybrid students in 5 days a week, and that's really exciting. So thank you for everyone and everyone who played a part in making this happen here in Stanford. It really did take a village for us to accomplish this. And so I'm glad you all are part of this village. Take care. Have a nice evening.